Welcome back to Haunted and Historic Australia for another episode in our Adventures series. In this episode, we take a look at Thornton Hall and Thomas Smith Reserve, located in Penrith.
Guess who's back? Back again.
In our last few episodes, we took a look at pioneer and early settler Thomas Smith and his family. Thomas Smith emigrated to Australia in the 1840s from Poulton-le-Field, Thornton, Lancashire, to parents Richard and Ellen Smith. Emigrating to Australia aboard Hope ship. It is believed, thanks to the hard work of Thomas Smith's descendant Laura Player, that Thomas Smith actually worked for Major Druitt, or Major George Druitt, the namesake of the suburb Mount Druitt, and someone who took part in the Napoleonic Wars. Laura thought, perhaps, that Major Druitt was over in England visiting Thornton Hall, around the area that she believed Thomas may have worked, hence naming his own property later on Thornton Hall. But it is also believed that possibly Major Druitt headhunted Thomas and brought him back to Australia, along with some cattle that he purchased from England. Now, it's just a theory, but it seems pretty good. Being a young fella, he may not have known anyone in Australia. He wasn't a convict. He was a free settler. So there had to be a reason, or possibly an invitation, to come to Australia for a young chap just to give up hometown and go halfway across the world for something else. So it's a good theory, I believe. Now, it isn't long after he comes to Australia to work for Major Druitt that Major Druitt actually dies, 1942, as well as his wife. But the property that Major Druitt owns isn't sold for another 8 years, and it is quite possible Thomas stayed there and worked the farm, even after his employer passed away. But after years of working Major Druitt's farm, he has enough money saved away for him and his new wife Jane and kids to build their own empire, first establishing the Red Cow Inn in Colleton, now Ropes Creek area, and then transferring it about almost 10 years later to the Penrith area. Thomas had 324 acres now by the 1870s and built Thornton Hall in 1870, a nod to a place he may have worked, or at least was very fond of, in his younger years. Thornton Hall was originally used to breed horses and cattle. It was used also as a golf course, rifle range, and had an orchard. Thornton Hall became embedded in Australia's history. First, Thomas Smith hosted the Sheffield Shield cricket match in 1892. Back then, the area was called Belmore Park, now known as Ron Mullock Oval, named after the late alderman of the Penrith area, Ron Mullock. It was also the birthplace of Australian aviation, where William E. Hart started his cross-country flight from Penrith to Parramatta Park, being at, you guessed it, Thornton Hall. And in 1930, it was the site of Penrith Speedway. It's an amazing story. Thomas Smith Sr. was also an alderman for the Penrith area right up until almost his death. His son Thomas Smith Jr. following in his footsteps, and his son Sidney Smith following in his, keeping politics in the family. The Smith family eventually gave up Thornton Hall in the mid-1900s. We had a look at Thornton Hall, which is now known as Greenwood Early Learning Centre for Children. It underwent a whole renovation, as Thornton Hall after it was parted with by the Smith family, was taken over by a military or defence force in Australia, and then simply left to go to ruin. It was in ruin for several decades before someone took the initiative to bring it back to how it once looked. We had to have a look for ourselves, and unfortunately, although it's a childcare centre, we weren't able to go inside or film very much because there were children present. But it's definitely somewhere to have a little look. The Thomas Smith Reserve, which is in Thomas Smith's honour, is just below Thornton Hall, and you can stand in the park and marvel at Thornton Hall's greatness from the park. We found it to be a really nice area and a good nod to one of Penrith's fine pioneers and pioneer families. Enjoy. It's now known as Greenwood. It's Thornton Hall. It's going left. Hope you can see that because it's now a child mining centre and I don't really want to be filming where children go to school, so hoping you can get a bit of that and we'll get some photos. But yeah, Thornton Hall. It's a nice looking place. And this down here is Thomas Smith Reserve. So the Smith family had Thornton Hall. I hope this isn't too bouncy for you as I'm walking downhill. Now, Thomas Smith we featured when we did our St Mary Magdalen Church and Cemetery. His gravestone was there. And also at the St Mary's General that he helped, or his son helped, establish. But they were some good episodes, so definitely go back and check those out, St Mary's episodes. And this is a little park in tribute to Thomas Smith, pioneer, and his son, who did a lot for the area of St Mary's and Penrith as well. They lived here at Thornton Hall, but it's not Thornton Hall anymore. It's now Greenwood Children's Education Centre or Hub. So, early education centre. So we don't really want to be filming that way too much. But here we go. There's got a little bit of information here on Thornton Hall. Now there's quite a bit of interesting stuff. The first plane that took flight in Australia was set off from this location and ended up in Parramatta Park. So that was quite interesting, and I'll have a bit more about that. But the Thomas Smith had the Red Cow Inn, which I believe is still around at the moment. Maybe called something else, but we can definitely find out. But this Thornton Hall was where they lived. It was built in 1870 by Thomas Smith, an immigrant from Thornton in Lancashire, England, arriving in between 1838 and 1842. And we've got a little bit of information on our previous episodes about Thomas Smith, publican, and his son, local parliamentary representative, elected Mayor of Penrith in 1889. So there's quite a bit of information here, and we mentioned a bit of it in the last couple of episodes in the St Mary's ones because they had a lot to do with St Mary's. Now, sadly, people have defaced this a little bit, but that's what Thornton Hall looked like at its heyday, which isn't that far from what it looks now. It's quite the same, really. They may have taken down that building, I think, from memory, but if not, they've redone it and maintained it over the years. It says here, for nearly 50 years, Thornton Hall served as a residence for commanding officers of the Royal Australian Engineers Stores Depot. How about that? It remained vacant and derelict for over 2 decades before the Department of Defence in 2011 turned it into something better, and now it's a child education preschool kind of thing. But there's definitely some information here. If you come down to the Thomas Smith Park and Thornton Hall, now Greenwood Early Child Minding Service or Centre. So much information. And this little reserve is in, so it's a nice little place on the corner here. New little area that seems to be called Thornton. So it's kind of underneath Thornton Hall, but it's a little estate. And I don't know if it's the estate's called Thornton. I'll have to find out. Or it's some kind of real estate thing. I don't know. I wasn't expecting to see a sign that said Thornton for all these houses, so that was interesting. But it's a nice little area to come and sit down, have a coffee, drop some paper, or a few. Looks like people just come here to dump their crap, but yeah, that's not very nice. It's been somewhat maintained, but I think it's got a lot of things like bird of paradise here to survive on its own with very little maintenance. Someone comes and mows the lawn by the looks. Apologies, it's really windy here now, so someone's left their groceries or something. I don't know, maybe there's a party inside, who knows. But this little area, it's a nice nod to Thomas Smith. Even if it's just somewhere that you walk your dog, you know. Like a little path to nowhere out this way. Oh no, it leads out to the path over there. They love their birds of paradise. And it's just under the watch of Thornton Hall, the old home of the Smiths. And they've built something onto the back of it. Be nice to be able to go up there inside it, but you know, I think I might be able to get some pictures of what it looked like before it was renovated, when it was sat derelict. Might be able to get a bit of information on when it was left and what they've done to it, if anything, to maintain it. I'll see if I can get some more footage of the front of it as we go back to the car, but clearly it's one of those places that you can't really go and film. You'd probably have to try and get the Greenwood education people's permission, or pretend that you have a kid that's going in there, something weird like that. But it's alright, we'll work something out. It's definitely a nice place, and there's people watching me film them, so I've got to be careful. There's Mitch. Yeah, so there's not a lot we can really do here besides provide a bit of background to Thornton Hall and when it was built, when it was left, its derelict years, and its creation back to now, the beautiful homestead you can see before you. But we'll get some information. Yeah, Thornton Hall and Thomas Smith Reserve next to it. It's a nice little place.
This thing?
Yeah.
Oh shit.
I'm so zoomed in.
I'll get a photo. Aussie made.
Old bunya pine may have been here when Thornton Hall was first built, and there's an array of lovely plants that you can see all the way along that leads up to Thornton Hall, which probably in the spring had a nice plant in front of it. It's getting a bit busy now, so I'll have to sign off.